Chocolate is the quiet architect of empires across centuries and oceans. What begins as a bitter Mesoamerican beverage becomes currency and power. This is a story about taste, money, violence, and invention. In this video, we will trace cacao from sacred rituals to industrial assembly line. Along the way, we will meet conquistadors, chocolatiers, factory hands, and farmers. By the end, you will see how a simple bean reshaped global power. Long before Europe knew the word chocolate, cacao trees grew beneath tropical canopies. Indigenous peoples cultivated and revered these trees for thousands of years. Archaeological traces suggest early ritual use dating back to ancient civilizations. The Olmec and Maya developed ceremonies around cacao and refined its preparation for elite consumption. Their recipes were frothy, bitter drinks often spiced with chili, aromatic seeds, and maize. Cacao functioned as both sacred offering and social marker among nobility. For the Maya, and later the Aztecs, cacao was more than food and more than flavor. Beans traveled in sacks as gifts, dowries, and royal tributes across Mesoamerica. In elite feasts, cacao established social bonds and spiritual legitimacy for rulers. The Aztecs elevated cacao into an official medium of exchange used every day and in taxation. Market vendors, soldiers, and merchants transacted with cacao beans as if they were coin. The commodity became a tangible measure of wealth and political reach for imperial administrators. Cacao as currency created practical incentives and brutal consequences at the same time. When famine or conquest disrupted production, the economy strained under the loss of currency and tribute. Power therefore became tied to control over land that grew cacao trees. This economic role made cacao strategically valuable to any emerging empire that could control its supply chains. The link between agricultural control and political dominance would later reappear under colonial rule. Control over cacao fields became a lever for wealth extraction at scale. The Spanish arrived in the early 16th century with hunger for gold and spices and a curiosity about local practices. Hernan Cortés and other conquistadors encountered cacao in royal courts and ceremonies. They saw not just a drink, but a commodity that could be reinterpreted for European tastes. Spaniards initially transported cacao to Spain with secrecy and novelty, adapting recipes and masking bitterness with sugar and honey. Chocolate shifted from sacred to secular contexts as it arrived in monasteries, aristocratic dining rooms, and royal houses. A formerly ritual beverage was being recast as fashionable European refreshment. In Spain, chocolate quickly became a status symbol among the elite who could afford exotic imports and sugar. The drink moved from royal banquets to convents where nuns brewed it as medicinal and restorative fare. Over time, the drink spread across European courts like a decadent fashion. By the 17th century, chocolate houses and salons hosted intellectuals, nobles, and merchants, exchanging ideas over cups. These social spaces mirrored the role coffee houses would play in public life, becoming centers for conversation and influence. Chocolate thus acquired a cultural and political presence beyond mere taste. Europeans transformed chocolate to fit new palates and commercial logic, adding sugar, cinnamon, and sometimes wine or milk. The taste evolution helped chocolate transcend its ritual origins and appeal to a growing consumer class. These flavor innovations were as important as the commodity itself for global expansion. The growing demand in Europe created new trade routes connecting plantations, ports, and urban centers across continents. Cacao production began shifting to colonial plantations that could supply beans at scale. Empire thus intertwined with agriculture and the commodification of taste. By the 18th century, chocolate had cemented itself as a luxury item and a marker of refinement among European elites. Chairs at tea tables and royal dining rooms became stages where power and taste were performed. The commodity now influenced etiquette, gendered consumption, and global trade policies. European governments and companies began to invest heavily in plantations in the Caribbean and South America to secure steady cacao supplies. Enslaved labor provided the backbone for many of these plantation economies, linking chocolate to moral and human catastrophes. The sweetness of chocolate increasingly masked a bitter human cost. The Industrial Revolution would transform chocolate from elite indulgence into a mass market product available to millions. New technologies like the cocoa press and steam-powered mills reduced production costs and standardized quality. These mechanical innovations changed the economics of chocolate forever by creating scale. In 1828, a Dutch chemist developed a method to separate cocoa solids from cocoa butter, creating powdered cocoa that could be mixed more easily. That innovation enabled new recipes and more consistent production, which in turn encouraged entrepreneurs to imagine chocolate bars for the masses. Technology was now a force multiplying the commodity's reach. Enterprising chocolatiers like Joseph Fry, Daniel Peter, and Rodolphe Lindt pushed the product into everyday life through invention and marketing. Joseph Fry created an early solid chocolate bar that could be eaten rather than sipped, altering consumption habits permanently. Daniel Peter and Henry Nestle later combined condensed milk with chocolate to invent smooth milk chocolate enjoyed worldwide. Rodolphe Lindt introduced conching, a process that gave chocolate a finer texture and rounder flavor profile appreciated by consumers. These technical breakthroughs dovetailed with expanding rail and shipping networks, creating national and then international markets. Chocolate moved from artisanal shops into factories and then into public appetites. In the United States, Milton Hershey perfected mass production of chocolate with assembly line methods and affordable packaging. Hershey's factory town model centralized production and labor in Pennsylvania, demonstrating how chocolate companies shaped communities as well as markets. The American approach prioritized scale, brand, and consistent taste for broad consumers. Worldwide, companies consolidated and brands began to dominate shelf space in cities and colonies alike, shaping global diets and preferences. Marketing turned chocolate into seasonal rituals and childhood memories, embedding it into modern culture. This industrial success, however, deepened dependency on reliable, cheap cocoa supply chains across the Atlantic and beyond. Colonial expansion and the industrial appetite for cacao drove a new geography of production focused on West Africa, particularly Ivory Coast and Ghana. European powers and later multinational companies invested heavily in plantations and export infrastructure. This geographic shift concentrated economic power and ecological pressure in a few producing nations. The demand for cheap beans intensified practices that relied on low wages and exploitative labor models, sometimes involving trafficking and child labor. These human rights issues would fester into modern scandals that haunt the chocolate industry today. Profitability for brands came at the expense of farm-level sustainability and dignity. By the late 20th century, investigative journalism and NGOs began exposing abuses within cocoa supply chains, forcing public scrutiny. Reports revealed child labor, forced labor, and impoverished farmers receiving only a fraction of chocolate's retail price. Consumers in wealthy countries started to question how their sweets were made and who benefited economically. In response, certification schemes like Fairtrade and Rainforest Alliance emerged, promising better prices and environmental standards for farmers. Some corporations launched sustainability programs and direct sourcing initiatives to improve reputations and secure long-term supply. Yet progress has been uneven, and many farmers still struggle with thin margins and climate vulnerability. The modern chocolate industry is dominated by a handful of multinational corporations that control processing, branding, and global distribution. These companies extract value at multiple points along the supply chain, while primary producers often remain price takers. Market concentration therefore creates structural inequalities that are difficult to dismantle. At the same time, small-scale craft chocolatiers and ethical brands challenge big players by focusing on single-origin beans and transparent sourcing. They tell consumer stories of cooperatives, varietals, and terroir in hopes of better prices for farmers. This niche movement highlights alternatives, but scaling ethical models remains a persistent economic puzzle. Cacao cultivation itself faces ecological threats from disease, deforestation, and climate change that will reshape future supply. Higher temperatures and changing rainfall patterns threaten yields in traditional growing regions, forcing farmers to relocate or switch crops. These environmental stresses create ripple effects through national economies dependent on cacao exports. Deforestation driven by expanding plantations has undermined biodiversity and indigenous land rights in many producing countries. Conservation efforts and agroforestry models offer more sustainable pathways by combining shade-grown cacao with biodiversity protection. The long-term viability of chocolate depends on connecting farmer welfare and ecological stewardship in practical, financed ways. Beyond economics and ecology, chocolate carries surprising psychological and cultural weight across human societies. The sensory experience of chocolate triggers memory, comfort, and ritual in holidays and personal celebrations worldwide. Marketers and communities alike exploit this emotional power to anchor traditions to specific products and moments. Neurologically, compounds in cacao influence mood and reward pathways, contributing to chocolate's reputation as an aphrodisiac and comfort food. Yet these biochemical effects are modest compared to the profound cultural associations humans attach to the food. Chocolate, therefore, operates at the intersection of chemistry, culture, and commerce. Medical claims about chocolate have ebbed and flowed with scientific trends and marketing claims over decades. Flavonoids in dark chocolate do show measurable cardiovascular benefits in controlled contexts, often related to lower blood pressure. However, sugar, fat, and portion size complicate broad health assertions, especially for mass-market confections. Public health messaging therefore must weigh nuance against simple narratives that chocolate is either miracle medicine or sheer indulgence. Consumers benefit from tempering expectations and choosing higher cacao, lower sugar options when seeking potential health advantages. The truth lies in moderation and informed choices rather than absolute health claims. Culturally, chocolate has been woven into religious rituals, colonial ceremonies, and modern marketing campaigns alike. In many Latin American festivals, cacao remains a symbol of ancestral heritage and resilience. Meanwhile, global holidays like Valentine's Day or Easter appropriate chocolate into commercial rituals that transcend origin stories. These varying cultural positions reveal chocolate's flexibility as both sacred symbol and commodity fetish. The same bean that once fed gods and paid taxes now fills mass-market aisles and social media feeds. That dual nature exposes the tensions between meaning and market that travel with chocolate through history. The story of chocolate is deeply entangled with imperial ambition, scientific innovation, and human cost. Empires sought to control land and labor to satisfy European appetites, creating legacies of extraction still visible today. Technology amplified reach, but also cemented inequalities at the point of origin. Understanding chocolate means recognizing how a humble bean became central to monetary systems, to industrial capital, and to modern consumer identity. The commodity is a mirror reflecting global systems of production, consumption, and morality across centuries. We learn more about human priorities and blind spots when we follow chocolate's path. Efforts to reform the chocolate industry propose varied solutions ranging from higher farm gate prices to cooperative ownership and agroecology. Fair trade premiums, direct trade relationships, and impact investing have all aimed to redistribute value back to producers. Successful programs typically combine financial incentives with technical training and market access. Yet, scaling these models faces market and political barriers that often protect incumbent corporate margins. Policy interventions, consumer pressure, and transparency initiatives must work together to make structural change viable at scale. The future of ethical chocolate depends on aligning incentives across consumers, companies, and governments. Some farmers and cooperatives are demonstrating that quality-focused, relationship-driven trade can yield better incomes and environmental outcomes. Single-origin premiums and bean-to-bar branding can help farmers capture more value when paired with processing capacity. These niche successes offer templates. Though they remain a small fraction of the global market, scaling upward requires infrastructure investment, access to finance, and supportive trade policies that reward long-term sustainability over short-term extraction. Philanthropic and public funding can de-risk these transitions for smallholders, enabling broader structural shifts. The problem is solvable if political will and consumer choices align with practical interventions. The ethics of chocolate demand that we interrogate comfort with our consumption patterns and the supply chains behind them. Every chocolate purchase sends a small signal about labor standards, environmental care, and corporate responsibility. Consumers who understand the upstream consequences of their sweet choices can influence market behavior over time. Collective consumer shifts, combined with regulatory pressure and corporate transparency, can gradually rewire incentive structures in favor of more equitable cocoa economies. This is not a romantic ideal, but practical politics applied to a global commodity chain. The choices of millions ultimately determine whether chocolate remains a legacy of extraction or becomes a model of fair prosperity. There is also a technological frontier in chocolate that might reshape production through genetics, climate resilience, and processing innovations. Scientists are exploring disease-resistant cacao varieties and improved fermentation techniques to enhance flavor and yield. These advances could help reduce vulnerability to climate shocks while increasing farmers' incomes. At the same time, digital traceability, blockchain, and direct payment technologies promise more transparent value chains. Technology is a tool, not a panacea, and its benefits will largely depend on how access and governance are structured. If properly deployed, innovation could support a fairer and more resilient chocolate economy. If you taste a piece of chocolate today, you are tasting millennia of human history, labor, innovation, and compromise. That small sensory moment compresses rituals, empires, and industrial funnels into an instant of pleasure and meaning. It is therefore a food that compels us to ask uncomfortable questions about our global system. Understanding chocolate's past and present reveals pathways for more ethical futures that preserve cultural richness and planetary health. The history of cacao can guide current choices about trade, labor rights, and environmental stewardship. Chocolate becomes a test case for whether consumers and institutions can choose fairness over convenience. Historically, chocolate helped finance empires and pacify populations through ritual and consumption alike. Empires learned that controlling taste could be as powerful as controlling territory, because desire is a durable lever for influence. Chocolate's trajectory therefore illuminates the interplay between culture and power across centuries. Today, the same levers remain in play as corporations shape taste and policy while farmers seek dignity and livable incomes. The question for modern societies is whether markets can be regulated, restructured, or culturally nudged to produce more equitable outcomes. Chocolate thus asks us whether we will prioritize justice or perpetuate profitable inequality. There is a poetic irony in the fact that a bean once used as currency now buys us moments of pleasure and global brands. Currency and comfort swapped places over centuries, revealing human priorities and the malleability of value. That transformation is both triumphant and tragic depending on the viewpoint and the ledger used. The deeper lesson is that commodities are social constructs that can be redesigned through policy activism and market innovation. When societies decide that fairness matters, supply chains can change to reflect that value. Chocolate, therefore, remains a potent example of how collective values shape economic reality. As consumers, we have simple but meaningful tools: our choices, our voices, and our votes for public policy. Choosing certified products, supporting brands with transparent supply chains, and advocating for stronger labor protections are practical steps anyone can take. Small acts multiplied across millions of consumers can change bargaining power at origin. Businesses also have responsibilities to invest in traceability, pay living incomes, and prioritize ecological farming methods that sustain landscapes and cultures. Governments must enforce labor laws, remove trade barriers for cooperative models, and incentivize regenerative agriculture. Collective action across these domains can reduce the moral dissonance of enjoying chocolate, while others suffer. In the end, chocolate is more than a treat. It is a mirror reflecting global inequality and human ingenuity. Its history teaches us that tastes are political and commodities are moralized through the choices societies make. Recognizing these truths empowers us to be more intentional with consumption and policy advocacy. If you care about the future of chocolate, you can begin by learning more and supporting initiatives that center farmers and ecosystems. The story is still being written, and public engagement will determine whether chocolate becomes a model of ethical globalization or a relic of unsustainable extraction. Our decisions now will flavor the world of tomorrow. Before we sign off, remember that chocolate's past complicates our sweetest pleasures in ways we often overlook. It links ancient ritual to modern branding, and personal comfort to structural injustice in unsettling but clarifying ways. Recognizing complexity is the first step toward meaningful change. If this narrative has shifted how you think about chocolate, let that curiosity lead you to read more, ask brands rigorous questions, and support reforms that center fairness and sustainability. Small choices have large effects when aggregated across millions of consumers and billions of supply chain decisions. Chocolate shaped empires because it fit perfectly into human systems of value, ritual, and extraction across eras. From Mesoamerican courts to European royal houses and to industrial factories, cacao has been a cultural and economic fulcrum. Its journey is a case study in how commodities can concentrate power and foster dependency. As we move forward, we have choices about what kind of chocolate economy to support through our consumption and civic engagement. The future could emphasize justice, ecological resilience, and cultural respect. But that future will not arise without sustained attention and policy action. Chocolate's history invites us to take responsibility for that future. If this video gave you a new perspective on chocolate, then you have tasted more than flavor alone. You have sampled a narrative that links flavor to finance, ritual to industry, and pleasure to policy. That synthesis is exactly the kind of history that helps us see modern systems differently. If you want more videos that unpack how everyday objects shape geopolitics and human life, then subscribe and join the conversation below. Share your thoughts on how chocolate shaped your own community or what reforms you think matter most today. Thank you for following this exploration of cacao, empires, and modern responsibility across 27 scenes. Each bean carries history, and every purchase carries consequences that ripple across continents and generations. Understanding that chain is how we begin to reimagine a fairer chocolate future. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and consider choosing brands that prioritize people and planet. Chocolate can be both a delight and a responsibility, and that tension is what makes its story endlessly fascinating.